stars, green and white, sacrifice the body.
What is up? Welcome back to another episode of First to the Floor. We have a very, very special episode for you here today. We're joined by a very special guest, the Oracle from Oregon, Captain Accountability, the author of Bubble Ball, the NBA's fight to save the NBA, the co-host of the Greatest of All Talk podcast, writer for the Washington Post, Ben Golliver. How are we, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, guys. That intro video was amazing. I noticed in the video, Marcus Smart was the first to the floor. I don't know if I'm the first to this joke, but now that you traded out Marcus Smart for Kristaps Porzingis, is the show going to be called Last to the Floor, or maybe Never to the Floor? Because I'd love to see you guys track how many times he's getting his knees and elbows on the floor, old school style, this season. Will you guys be doing that for me?
First to the hospital, maybe, depending on how the season goes. Fingers crossed.
Yes, we have a new intro video in the works. It is an emotional, it's an emotional toll to change this intro video that we've loved so much. First to the Floor was very much inspired by Marcus Smart. To see him go, it's been a tumultuous off-season to say the least, but you'll be unsurprised, Ben Golliver, that the green beer has been flowing, and we've talked ourselves into what has happened this off-season. Aussie Phil in the chat, another green beer enthusiast, all beer in general. So he'll be very happy to see Ben Golliver on here. But Ben, also to the listeners, I'm going to be referring to First to the Floor Ben as Mr. Vallis and Ben Golliver as Ben, just as we're bringing in, trade deadline acquisition. We're going to try and make everybody feel comfortable on this episode today. But Ben Golliver, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of maybe endear yourself a little bit to the First to the Floor audience before you turn on us as the episode goes on, I'm sure. But, so typically this slot right above my head is reserved just for Larry Bird signed, but I have made space for a bubble ball here.
Wow.
Just
two
for
legends,
you.
side by side, two basketball legends. That's beautiful. You know what I think you guys should do is wait like 20 games, okay? If somehow Boston starts like 8-12 and you're missing that hustle factor, I would recut your intro video as only Marcus Smart highlights, just to send a message about what happened this summer and how important he is, because he's going to be back eventually. You want to be on the right side of history with that one. So if it's a shaky start at all and everybody else is yelling for Missoula's head and people are starting to call Jalen Brown overpaid, any of that kind of stuff, just stick to the positive Marcus Smart stuff. I think you're going to have a nice lane there.
Well, I know we've got the Marcus Smart highlights ready to go at all times, so that's definitely an easy way for us to pivot. But one of my favorite parts about the bubble, and we're going to get into Brad Stevens here in a second, but your experience within the bubble, and specifically your experience kind of being around Brad Stevens, close proximity, both have a shared passion for walking and sharing the walking tracks at Disney World. I know you have a bit of a respect for Brad Stevens. So kind of where are you and your history with the president himself?
Oh, well, I've had so many injury issues and various surgeries over the years that I could pretty much only walk, so I've had to take it pretty seriously. And I felt it was a real situation in the bubble. I felt like Brad Stevens was a pretty serious walker. So much so, I think towards the end of the bubble, when families were allowed to show up, I believe he was doing laps around the bubble because there was only one place to walk. So everybody's walking on the same track. Just depends if you're walking clockwise or counterclockwise, right? I believe he was walking with his wife on a daily walk towards the end of the bubble, if I'm not mistaken. So he's got those newbies, those white newbies, just very, very cool dad shoes, if I recall correctly. And the reason why I remember Brad from the bubble walking circuit is, I have high standards as somebody who walks all the time in my neighborhood. Like, there's a certain courtesy, there's a certain decorum. If other people have headphones in, I always try to give the little hand wave, the head nod. You don't want to try to start a conversation with random strangers, but you want to show some acknowledgement. Brad was a 100% acknowledger. He was always nodding. He's always smiling. Even if he was like going on some phone call and you could tell he was all wrapped up in it, he would always give the little head nod. Even if you're passing him 2 or 3 times on the same walk because you're trying to get extra steps, he would still give the little nod or the wave every single time. So I just, decorum is important to me, right? Just like you guys want players who are going to hit the floor. I want executives that are going to be respectful, going to have a nice firm handshake, that are going to look you in the eye, and that are going to wave at you when you're stuck, in a basketball bubble in Central Florida in the middle of crazy rainy season, and still going to show some love. So that will be my lasting memory of Brad Stevens forever. Will just be the sheer number of miles he put in, and Eric Spoelstra too, by the way. The true grinders, the true big personalities of that Eastern Conference were just loving the walk-in circuit in the bubble. Spoelstra couldn't get enough. It was crazy. So yeah, good times.
That's amazing. Great walkers, great acknowledgers. That's really good to hear on the Brad Stevens front, because on the latest annual Fraud Watch segment on the Greatest of All Talk podcast, a great podcast, and subscribe if you haven't already, you had Brad Stevens as a member of, or a listed candidate of this year's Fraud Watch. Can you help us understand
Unbelievable.
how Brad Stevens, the beautiful Brad Stevens, who we love and adore and admire so much, can find his name there on that Fraud Watch segment, and what he could do going into this season to endear himself such to you that he can get himself off that list?
Well, I'm completely unsurprised. This is the topic you guys wanted to bring up right off the top. No shock whatsoever. So, first of all, as I said on the show, I'm a Brad Lever. I actually, I'm a guy who shares, I think, a lot of similar principles, or I look for similar things in players as Brad has, through the course of his coaching career, but also, through the course of his, his executive career. You look at a lot of his moves, he makes a lot of white New Balance moves, man. the Derek White trade, right? The Al Horford deal. You even look, the Malcolm Brogdon trade. Like, I look at those as moves for reliability, consistency, not flash. He's not wearing Jordan 11 patent leathers when he's walking around that bubble loop. He's looking for guys he can trust. He already has his best player in place and second best player in place with Tatum and Brown. He's trying to surround them with guys he can bank on, count on, not necessarily high ceiling moves, but high floor moves and low volatility moves, right? That's been Brad's MO. And the concept of Fraud Watch is that we're not trying to say anyone's a fraud now. We're just trying to forecast over the next 12 months who could be in line for criticism that they really haven't faced before. And Brad is Teflon, man. This guy has never taken national heat during his NBA career. And obviously during his college career, he did it because he was the wonder kid, bringing Butler out of nowhere to be this just incredible, within basically one shot of winning the NCAA title, which would have been probably the craziest moment in the tournament's history if they had hit that shot, right? So it's actually really impressive how he avoided criticism, because in that 21 season, as you guys know, some injuries hit. They didn't come back from the bubble right. He kind of lost the locker room, but didn't really catch heat because everybody was so upset about Danny, right? And so It was such an elegant move that Danny leaves and Brad doesn't get fired. Brad gets promoted, so he gets empowered. So he basically escaped criticism during that entire transition. And then he makes the Horford move, which saves the next season, right? So it was like this beautiful stroke of like, how is this guy? He's like a magician, It's like, look over here. And then here he is making this other move. But here's the problem. Swapping out Marcus Smart for Kristaps Porzingis, that's not a New Balance move. That's like a Versace shoe move. And I don't know if you guys have seen those Versace shoes, right? Like, they work for some people. They're super flashy, right? But then for the average person, might not be able to pull it off. You wear them once, you scuff them. They're $3,000. You could never wear them again. It's not the reliable shoe that you're going to be taking on your bubble walks, right? So all I'm trying to say here with the Fraud Watch conversation is Brad is sticking his neck out this summer in a way that we just haven't seen him do before. This is a pretty big swing on a guy who hasn't worked out, in my opinion, in his last three stops. In New York, they didn't give him away for peanuts, but they basically gave up on him. They didn't want to give him that big contract, so they trade him to Dallas. In Dallas, he had one good postseason and one awful postseason. They did give him away for peanuts because he couldn't fit with Luka. And then you look at Washington. I don't really give him credit for Washington because those guys are just playing fantasy basketball, getting numbers. They're not really a serious franchise last season. So for Porzingis, there's a bunch of questions, right? Just to wrap this up. He's got to show that he could fit in with star-level players and not be the man. Tatum's going to have the ball. Tatum's going to score 30. How could Porzingis make Tatum better? He's not really a distribution-minded player, not a great passer. He's not this like dog on the glass who's going to be getting you 15 contested rebounds a game. He wants to have a lot of touches. He wants to be featured in the offense. And history says he hasn't been happy when he's not been a priority. I don't see him eating more than third in the Celtics pecking order at best, maybe lower depending on how some of these other things shake out. And that's my concern. It's sort of like personality, culture fit. Are you going to be able to get the most out of Porzingis? We know his three-point shooting is going to fit because Joe will let anybody shoot. There's no question on that front. But it's everything else about the sport in terms of personalities, in terms of defensive presence, in terms of frontline lineup combinations. How is this guy going to fit? I just think it's a huge open question. It's a big risk from Brad. So one part of me is actually proud of Brad for sticking his neck out and going for the Versace sneakers. The other part of me is like, bro, you might be missing these New Balances. It could be like 3 months from now, and we're all just thinking, why did he swing so big on this guy?
I don't think anyone's going to disagree that this is a higher risk move. This is a great analogy. I don't think you're going to want to be first to the floor if you're wearing these Versaces. I think that's fair to say. But I will say at the same time, I think it's a calculated risk and a risk that the Celtics can handle if it goes the other way, which I think we can get to. But well documented. The biggest issue, I think, has been with the Celtics not winning the title the last 2 years has been offense and in particular, crunch time offense. We see Marcus Smart leave, and as great as Marcus Smart has been in the playoffs, I think, one of the more underrated playoff risers that we have in the NBA. One of his biggest strengths is often one of his biggest weaknesses. He's never going to be scared to take a shot. And I think Ben Golliver has dubbed him the elite shot misser, I think, if we're not mistaken.
It's not the nicest nickname, but like you said, the ball's always in his hands when the game is on the line. He's always the one who takes the shot, and there's been so many moments, and that goes back to the bubble, where it's like, hey, Marcus, just let JT take one. Just let him try it. Let him just see what happens if he takes it. Who knows? He might make it and surprise you, right?
Well, this is my thing with sending out Marcus. And you go back, and unfortunately, I've watched a lot of the Warriors series and a lot of these Heat series to really figure out like where Brad's head's at. And the Heat have decided for 2 years in a row to leave Marcus Smart wide open and clog the lane against Tatum and clog the lane specifically against Jalen. And it's not a mystery why Marcus Smart finds himself with the ball open in these situations, because the Celtics have a lot of shooting on these rosters, and Marcus Smart is the clear choice to leave wide open, and the offense has fallen apart. The Celtics' go-to crunch time action has been a screen, a pick and roll, and a pick and pop with Marcus Smart and Jayson Tatum, and it works really well throughout the regular season. It works really well in rounds 1 against the Hawks, round 2 against the Sixers. And same again last year in the Bucks series, it worked well. You come against really good defenses, elite defensive coaches like the Golden State Warriors, guys like Draymond, Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo. That action does not work when those two players, and especially when one of those players in the actions is not a real offensive threat in the same way that the theoretical version of Porzingis is. It's like, that's what Brad's betting on, is like, the issue with this team not winning the title has been offense. Like, the defense has been good enough. It slipped last year a little bit. Part of that was to do with Marcus Smart. He was not the same defender last season. You bring in a guy, like, for all of Porzingis' warts, offensive versatility, capability, ceiling, completely different level to what Marcus Smart brings on the offensive end, especially when you get into those tight moments. Ben, Mr. Vallis, I see you nodding your head here. You're enjoying what I'm saying a little bit more, I think, than what Ben Golliver was saying.
I'm enjoying the conversation all around. Like, there's good thoughts on either side. I would just add that we had some great stretches last year when Marcus Smart was completely out of the lineup due to injury, where Derek White became the primary point guard, proved himself to be a very capable, if not exceptional, primary point guard. And we took, as you said, Jake, that ingredient out of the recipe where Marcus Smart was left with the ball in his hands as the shot clock wound down, which is part of the intent defensively from the opponent's perspective. So, yes, I mean, getting back to the Brad Stevens stuff, absolutely a risky move. He is attempting to try on these Versace shoes and walk around the walking track in them, attempting to keep them clean. But, like, I think we'd hit our ceiling with Marcus Smart. So he had to make the ballsy move in the end there, which is where we find ourselves.
Oh, I agree with that. Like, I think he solved two problems here by making this by this summer. The first was the tension there was not just basketball tension with Marcus Smart. I could just kind of feel it between him and Jalen, and I mean, it never really boiled over like reportedly it did in the bubble where there's chairs being thrown and all that. But you could tell that they didn't always want the ball in his hands in those moments, just like Celtics fans were probably thinking, hey, why is the ball always coming to this guy? And, maybe it's just subtle body language stuff you see in person at games. There's not one particular moment that jumps out to me, but it felt like they had run their course and it was time for a shakeup. And so I wasn't surprised at all to see Marcus go. The other issue they have is Horford's getting old, and he is ageless. There's no question about it, but I thought he slipped a little bit last year, too, in terms of his effectiveness. He's been a crucial piece for them in postseason matchups. So you need to add something else to that front court, especially if you're going to be losing Grant, which a lot of people kind of expected going into the offseason. You have to have another piece back there just so you're not completely leveraged on Horford the whole way. So Porzingis, in theory, accomplishes, kind of both of those goals. I just don't believe that the actual Porzingis is going to be as exciting as you guys seem to be hoping for. And we'll see. I mean, it's the most functional situation he's ever been in. Down in Dallas, his last year in Dallas, it's dicey. I mean, it was, at least his last playoff year, I should say. I mean, Rick Carlisle's out the door, Lucas screaming at Carlisle during playoff games. Porzingis is just sort of, off to the side, barely even getting to touch the ball. New York, when he was there, has been dysfunctional forever. And Washington was in the middle of a complete, are we rebuilding, are we not? Brad's kind of, with his indecision about his future, kind of holding the franchise hostage in a certain way. So he hasn't had a great basketball culture or organization yet. This is by far the best organization he's been in. If it doesn't work, I think it actually says more about Porzingis than it does about the Celtics. But the Celtics don't have the luxury of it not working. They really need it to work, right? Like, they don't have a lot of backup plans here.
Yeah, absolutely, no question. I think that it's a question. But I do think when you talk about just like simple X's and O's, it's like we love what Rob Williams gives you from a lob threat perspective. We love what Horford gives you from a pick and pop perspective. Having someone like Porzingis, like just when it comes to crunch time to run, can we just run pick and roll with a guy that's like can roll, pop, and like really punish defenses? You can attack closeouts. You can throw it to me in the post. Like Miami's switching everything against the Celtics and just like that completely just short-circuiting the Celtics. Like, just trying to think who the Heat even have on the roster right now. Like Josh Richardson switching on to Jayson Tatum or Marcus Smart, like he can kind of hang there. But if they're switching everything and it's Porzingis now, are the post-up numbers as good as they were last year? Even if they drop a little bit, like that's still a really nice matchup, I think. And we are going to see, I do think, theoretically, Brad knows ball, and I do subscribe to like when Brad got pushed out, like from a coaching perspective, I was very, very anti. Like that season was a disaster. That roster had Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice running double bigs, Carson Edwards, Tremont Waters. It was a Semi Ojeleye disaster of a roster, and they still made they still were the 7th seed. Still, despite Tatum long COVID, the whole thing, Brad might even be better so far as a GM. So I don't think he can do both jobs, but I do believe in his basketball mind and his ability to kind of see this stuff.
Well, let me ask you. Can I ask you guys a question about Brad? In this whole fraud watch discussion, how bad would it have to get for anyone to actually turn on him and for him to get criticized? Because he has lined this up with some real fall guys. I mean, everybody's already on the coach. I mean, this guy just gets destroyed from every single angle, right? He's already been in the line of fire for a full year, so he's going to get it. Porzingis, you got to admit, is a big target, an obvious fall guy. If he misses, I'm telling you guys, I know you love him right now. If he misses 40 games because of injury this season, you're going to be singing a different tune, I promise you, right?
Sure.
So how bad does it have to get before there's blowback to Brad for the way that, he's kind of pieced this thing together? Or do we have to wait another season or two? Is it even possible this year? I guess I'll ask you guys that.
I've barely allowed my mind to wander down that
I was
path.
going to say,
I'm
we
such
don't
a
think
Brad
about
believer.
that.
But you're right. There are lines in chalk all around him. He has lined up a number of culprits to take the blame if shit does hit the fan, to use that expression. I think a number of things would have to go particularly wrong in, we've seen the gambles that he's made in, committing to the Jaylen Brown contract. And we've done plenty of podcasts about that and about how there was no real alternative for the Celtics in, other than making that commitment. And now trading away Marcus Smart in favor of Kristaps Porzingis. If all of those gambles, and those two being the biggest one, and perhaps committing to Joe Mazzulla as well, if all of them fail in quick succession, maybe that's when we start to turn our heads as diehard Celtics fans towards Brad Stevens and start to doubt him a little bit. Jake, what would you add to that? I mean, that seems like a pretty bad trifecta.
Ben, is there a line in the sand for you in terms of what they have to do in the playoffs? Like, let me ask it that way. Like, if somehow they were to lose in the first round, is Brad catching heat? I mean, obviously, if they get back to the conference finals, who's going to be upset about it, right? But I'm just saying, like, how bad would it have to get for people to say, hey, Brad screwed this thing up? I'm not predicting they're going to lose in the first round. Don't get me wrong. I'm just like, I'm giving you some different hypotheticals for like where the bar of expectations is for Brad.
I think there's a spectrum of disappointment there, and to lose in the first round would permeate throughout that spectrum, and we have to see what went wrong there in order for the team to lose. But if we started to see a lot of the same symptomatic issues with the offense in particular, and our inability to force turnovers defensively, if we started to see the same old Celtics despite the roster shakeup, I think, again, that's where we'd start to err on the side of doubt for Brad Stevens. Jake, how would you add to that?
So Brad Stevens, one of his favorite books is, I believe it's called Kaizen. And they have this word tattooed on the weightlifting room in the Auerbach Center. Kaizen is a Japanese word for basically is, the growth mindset. Every day you're getting better, process over results. And
I'm asking you results here, not process.
If they were to go out in the first round, then you say Brad hasn't taken criticism. You're not listening to the 98.5 WEEI guys like we're kind of tapped into. He caught a lot of heat locally, I think, but that's just kind of how Boston media market goes.
What were they mad at him? Because I was talking more about national. I mean, I do think
they
still got that golden boy, the golden boy mentality nationally. But what are the locals upset about with Brad?
They just thought that that the team didn't have the dog in them, for a lack of a better phrase, in that season, and the fact that he wasn't able to get them, Jayson and Jalen, to like each other and work out together. Really, I thought very, very dumb stuff. But as far as like actual analysis goes, you are correct. He has skated on everything. I think if they were to lose in the second round to a Dameless Miami, that would be blowback on a lot of people. That's the thing. I think Tatum would probably take the most. He kind of seems to take a lot of the heat. And then Mazzulla would probably be at the top of the list. But that flows right onto Brad. And a lot of people were not happy with Mazzulla's extension when it happened because they didn't really need to do it. But Brad believes in him, his ability, and the fact that he got thrown into like a really terrible situation. But like, if it goes badly, I'm not going to be someone that's going to sit back and be like, I like the way that he's, made all these moves. The Marcus Smart trade hurt a lot, but like the value that he got back from Marcus Smart in Porzingis, plus the 2 first-round picks, one of them being the Warriors pick, which has high upside. Like that pick was 19th overall last year. Chris Paul comes in. That team's old. Does that pick turn into like a top 10 pick all of a sudden? It's top 4 protected. Like that, like the process is fine. They're not a Phoenix Suns team. I know Andrew Sharp on the GOAT podcast said, I'd much rather be the Suns in second apron hell. And I was like, the Celtics aren't in over the second apron, first of all. They own all of their own picks. They have extra picks. Just treasure trove of picks relative to the Suns. Their players are younger. They have the best team out of both rosters. I personally find it hard to really criticize Brad unless like this Porzingis thing goes if like Porzingis doesn't buy in and he becomes a malcontent and like Brad was not able to foresee that side of things, that would be maybe where I have some questions. Like him not knowing about the plantar fasciitis, that was I was like, Brad, you probably should have known.
Well, look, he's going to
That's the
miss
thing.
games one way or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you guys got
Yes.
to pencil in a certain
Yeah.
amount where you're just wondering where he is. That's just kind of how it goes with him. But he's gigantic. I mean, it's not a huge surprise when you have players who are that big with that unusual bodies with injury histories. Like, stuff's going to happen. Well, I was very impressed for two reasons with your answers. One, you have high standards, and two, you're not about ultimatums. I think you guys are much more rational than a lot of Celtics fans, green beer drinkers, as I like to call them, who I've come across in the past. I did think that 21 season was just insanely disappointing. I mean, I had a big column that year where I caught actually a lot of heat because I called them the biggest disappointment in the NBA. Coming out of the bubble, I thought it was one of the most talented rosters in the league, if not the most talented. I mean, a really, really nice roster. It's been that way for these last couple of years. And so maybe it's a slower burn for Brad, right? Like if you guys don't get over the hump and, Tatum continues to kind of hit the wall in the postseason where he doesn't have that crowning moment, he doesn't have that Michael Jordan t-shirt and Kobe Bryant t-shirt moment that he's so desperate for, maybe that's when it's like, oh, wow, you look back on it a few years from now and you're like, man, this was like a really good team for like 8 straight years. And they don't have anything to show for it besides, the one finals appearance and a bunch of conference finals appearances. So maybe Brad gets, caught up in this conversation, retroactively as opposed to in the moment. But I don't know where it's going to go. To be honest, I thought you guys were the most talented team last year. I thought you should have beat Miami on paper.
Well, we didn't have devil magic, Ben. Caleb Martin turned into Michael Jordan for 6 games, and Jayson Tatum hurt his ankle. But these things happen.
Yeah. Well, it was a wild scene there for Game 7. Were you guys at Game 7 by any chance? It was like the only Celtics game that I got to last year.
Yeah, of course it was.
Holy moly. Maybe I'm the devil magic. Is that what you're saying?
You definitely didn't help. I know you were at Game 4 of the Golden State Boston series as well. I know that when you're going to a game, it's not usually a good thing. I'm so certain that they win that game if Jayson Tatum doesn't hurt his ankle on the first play of that game. He was putting Jimmy Butler in a locker body bag in that Game 6 game. Goes to the line. Your favorite thing. Tatum gets to the line, first play of the game. But
yeah, blood on my hands on that one because I was screaming for 3 years Tatum needs to attack the rack more. He attacks the rack, he goes down, boom, what are you going to do? And then it's just, the whole thing got away from him. The thing that I love about Celtics fans, because people think I'm kind of this Celtics antagonist, I love a fan base that will boo a team off its home court after they reach the Eastern Conference Finals.
I don't.
Game 7. I like the high standards, man.
That's right.
I have the high standards. It's great.
I understand, especially what was happening. I think those boos were specifically for Jalen Brown. We one thing we didn't talk about in this kind of edition, and on that game specifically, Derek White was doing his best to bring the Celtics back into that game and giving them a chance to win that game. If Jalen Brown could have just taken the hint and been like, I'm going to play my role, I'm going to play the play finisher role, not try and be Jayson Tatum. Derek White was taking up the Jayson Tatum role in a really impressive way. Got it down to a 7-point lead with about 5 minutes to go in the third quarter, and then Jalen Brown had his 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th turnover. I'm not sure. I blacked out after the 5th one, I think. But Derek White, I'm not sure. I noticed he was not. So Ben Golliver for the Washington Post does my favorite top 100 list out of all of them. You take into account a lot of factors: regular season, postseason availability, a lot of shared values. I think between Celtics fans and Ben Golliver. But a notable omission, I think, from last year's list was Derek White was not on it. I'm just going to double check here.
No, I think you're right. He was on it, I believe, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He had that bad playoffs, so he wasn't on it last year.
Yeah,
in part because he was going to have a smaller role. As I was coming into the season, I thought he was like just lower on their pecking order. My new list for this upcoming season publishes opening night, and he has made the cut for this year's list. You guys will be glad to know. And I think the Celtics actually might be the only team with 6 guys on the list.
I was going to say, you talk about talent and like this.
Warriors. The Warriors got 6 on as well. Yeah.
I was going to say Warriors when I was thinking about it today. I think the Warriors might be the only team that would have as many as the Celtics. But Derek White specifically as the lead guard, he was better than Marcus Smart last year. And that's I think part of Brad's calculus is that it wasn't actually particularly close, kind of on either end. And because of the politics of the team, Derek White played 28 minutes a game, and he was the best player like in crunch time a lot of the time. And there was like a skid in the middle of the season. They lost to the Knicks. Derek White's on the bench, and it just makes no sense. And so, like, I think Derek White again, I think raises their ceiling just because he's a better offensive threat. Your thoughts on Derek White as the lead point guard? Because I think Marcus Smart was 47th on the list last year from memory. I would imagine I would have them flipped going into next season.
So it goes back a little bit to what I said about solving two problems with this offseason. I think, part of the problem was too many guys in the backcourt, right? That's part of the problem with Marcus is like he's playing a lot of minutes, he's taking a lot of shots, that's coming at other people's expenses. And it's not just about the two stars in Marcus, there's also the Derek White factor in there. So this should definitely give very clear role definition for Derek White. He's honestly maybe the biggest winner on the team of the entire summer, if you really think about it, because he knows exactly what's going to be asked of him. He's getting the bigger role. The whole Brogdon thing is a question mark, so he may be even, White might end up with too much on his plate by the end of the season. We'll see how this plays out. But Porzingis kind of, solved some of the front court depth issues that were cropping up by the end. I like Derek White. Like I said, I tend to share similar basketball values. I like his competitiveness. He is a great two-way player, underrated two-way player. Ceiling as a scorer, I think, is a question mark, when he's playing high leverage games, exactly what can he give you every single night? Is he going to be able to he's never going to be an all-star level lead guard, right? But is he able to be like a clearly above average lead guard? Because I think you're probably going to need somebody in that tier to be able to win a title, especially if you look at what Denver just did, right? Or you just go back to the other recent champions, whether it's Steph, whether it's LeBron in that role in 2020. Milwaukee is kind of the exception, but Drew Holiday's so elite on defense that he's also in that like very good, but maybe not A+ kind of point guard territory. So maybe that's the best comp for him if he could be Boston's version of Drew Holiday. I think so much of what the Celtics title stuff just comes down to Tatum. Like he's starting to get in the sweet spot of his career. He has enough talent around him. He's had a number of huge playoff moments in the past. He's had a bunch of moments, like I mentioned earlier, where I just wish he would have been the featured guy as opposed to however else it played out. The whole thing about like you have to take the steps to get to the top. He's gone through every step. He's stumbled multiple times. He's gone through the pain like LeBron did, losing to the Dallas Mavericks in 2011. Like this
we know.
We're getting to his moment, right? Like we're getting to his moment, and I guess I'm going to say if you don't win the title next year, I'm probably not going to look back and say it was Derek White's fault. I'm probably going to look back and say the Porzingis deal didn't work out, or Jayson Tatum didn't take the step that everybody's been waiting for here for the last 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we'll, Mr. Vallis, what are you going to say then?
Well, I think that's maybe another reason why Brad's had so much of a runway to this point is that we've still been waiting for Jayson Tatum to get into what is typically, at least age-wise, a leading player's prime. And hitting 25 is still kind of pre-prime, historically speaking.
Isn't he 19?
That's right.
That's right.
Look,
there we go.
7 years ahead of us. Yeah, now we're on brand. We do want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the rest of the Eastern Conference. But before we do that, we just want a quick word from our sponsor. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, thanks to FanDuel and for CLNS for presenting this podcast. We do want to zoom out a little bit and have a look at the rest of the Eastern Conference. So, and talking about like if everything goes poorly for the Celtics this year and Porzingis misses 60-odd games, what does a down year even really...
His numbers keep going up. 40, 50, 60. Oh, my goodness.
Sorry to put
he
that
said
out
it,
there.
not me.
Unbelievable.
Right. We can cut that, right? All right. So what does a down year even look like for these Celtics in a weakened Eastern Conference? And, we know that you're the founder of Giannis Inc. And perhaps, going back to Fraud Watch, you had in there everyone not named Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray on the Denver Nuggets as part of that Fraud Watch segment. It may be, I don't want to call it a travesty to not have everyone but Giannis on the Bucks also part of that Fraud Watch list, but I might potentially put them up there. So given that that's maybe the biggest competitor to these Celtics in this Eastern Conference this year, doesn't that just bode well for the Celtics in general for their successes?
Well, I got to say this, man. The thing I love about the Celtics more than anything else is how much that 21 title just kills you guys. Because Tatum's still with none, Giannis with one. That is just the biggest W head-to-head of all time. And you guys have done really well against them in the playoffs.
Oh, we know.
Typically. And just to see him break through, it's just the utter pain, isn't it? And I love the framing of the question because it's just so reliable. I deal with guys like Michael Pina all the time. I'm sure you know him. And, he hits me with these same anti-Bucks questions all the time. And everyone's always saying, Giannis is going to leave. They got to trade him. It's always the Celtics media starting those conversations. So I love the dynamic. I don't know nationally if it gets talked about as a rivalry, but I view it as a rivalry. Especially that series in 22. I mean, even though Milwaukee was shorthanded, right? What a series, what a battle, and the swings and the momentum punches and everything was just crazy. So, anyway, to answer your question, super weird offseason, and mainly because we were already in this parity era, right? Of the NBA. We haven't had a repeat champion since Steph and KD Warriors. So we've already been in this weird parity era of the NBA that we really haven't seen at any other point during our lifetimes. Now you have none of the good teams, in my opinion, getting demonstrably better, right? And you have a lot of the bad teams like the Houstons and the San Antonios and the Oklahoma Cities. I wouldn't consider them bad, but, not playoff teams, who are getting better because they're either adding talent, getting people back healthy, making big draft choices, whatever else it might be. So you're already in a parity era, and it just feels like it's flattening and it's flattening and it's flattening, right? I look at Milwaukee. They didn't add a single player of consequence. They lost Javon Carter, and they paid other guys to come back. They got more expensive. They didn't get better, right? I look at Boston. I'm obviously a little bit lower on the Porzingis deal than you guys are, so I would say sidestep for Boston, right? It's like if you tread water, you're a winner at the top of the conference. I look at Cleveland. You add Max Strus. You're not throwing a parade for Max Strus. It's not how it works, right? You look at Miami. It's a TBD. Even if they get Lillard, depending on what they give up, is that a step forward, or did the losses they had in free agency kill their depth to the point where that formula that was just good enough to get them the 8th seed last year is no longer going to work, right? So, and Philly, don't even get me started on Philly, right?
That's one thing we were aligned on is Jayson Tatum's better than Joel Embiid, and the Sixers don't even need to be on Fraud Watch anymore, which is great.
That was the one of the best developments, I would say, of the bubble experience was just watching the Celtics rip the Sixers to shreds in that first round series. Because, I'm coming in with visions of Larry Bird, on your backdrop versus, Dr. J. I mean, this is throwback to the good old days. And Embiid's huffing and puffing up the court in, middle of the second quarter. And they're not guarding any of the shooters. Tatum's just getting loose whenever he wants. The series is over before you know it. Brett Brown, I don't think he made a single adjustment the entire time. Embiid was calling out his coaching halfway through the series. It was just crazy. What a time to be alive. So anyway, I digress. Philly, needless to say, did not get better either, right? And so when I go back to this idea of Tatum, because we're waiting to see the ceiling with Tatum, right? But he has become a guy who's absolutely a floor raiser. I just pencil Boston in at this stage of his career for, 48 to 50 wins minimum, right? So how low are you going to be on the pecking order if that's your low baseline? And it's similar to Giannis. As long as he's playing, you're going to get 48 to 50 wins minimum, I think, if you're Milwaukee as well. So to me, when I survey the landscape, I think those are the two biggest teams that you have to really worry about in the Eastern Conference. I think Cleveland's got too many lineup issues once you get to the postseason. Miami, we can't really assess them until we get this situation resolved, whether they're going to add Damian Lillard or not. And the other teams, whether it's the New York Knicks or whoever else you want to throw into the conversation, I just don't think they're ready for primetime. And I certainly don't think Philly's ready for primetime. So to me, it's going to boil right down to where it's been for most of the last 5 years, which is Milwaukee versus Boston, and if we get that Eastern Conference Finals, I'm going to be as happy as you guys.
Yeah, I have to include Miami because they've hurt me too much over the past 3 years as well. Like
there's trauma there.
There's trauma there. But like, I agree, and I actually think it's okay. Maybe not necessarily going into this season, but that Giannis and the Bucks maybe are higher floor team. Maybe like sometimes a better team. But for that head-to-head matchup, the Celtics just have kind of owned them for the most part when they've gone head-to-head, regular season and playoffs, going back to Tatum's rookie year, outside of the Kyrie playoff series.
Great series. That was so much fun. I'm sure you guys love that, you know?
That was fun. Yeah.
You guys should look up my column real quick after that series, because it was essentially... It was as if I was a divorce counselor or a divorce attorney explaining why the two parties needed to separate. And I wrote it within like 2 hours of the end of the last game of that series. And I was just like, it was just 1,000 words of straight, just like ether towards the entire thing, how it needed to be blown up. I was so glad it did blow up, because if he had gone back somehow, I would have looked like an absolute just, moron. But anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
No, I'm very glad that Kyrie is gone. It's worked out very well for us. Last 17 games against the Bucks, the Celtics are shooting 40% from three. And I like that, like, Adrian Griffin's coming in. Look, Budenholzer was the coach that got him to the finals. I don't know what Adrian Griffin's going to do. Is he going to fix Chris Middleton's knees? Is he going to make Brook Lopez a switch defender? Is Malik Beasley going to be good at defending? I don't really know what Adrian Griffin's going to be able to do with this roster. Like, Budenholzer was pretty flexible with what he wanted to do in that finals run. I think that roster's limited with perimeter defenders. Like, outside of Drew Holiday, they don't have any good perimeter defenders. Middleton was the other guy, and look, 2 knee surgeries in the past 18 months, 31, 32. He was barely able to guard Jayson and Jalen before that, and as he kind of declines and as Tatum and Jalen get better, I don't see the Bucks being able to contain them consistently over a series. So I think with that matchup in particular, even if the Bucks, maybe with Giannis being the best player on the court, maybe in a vacuum you could argue are better. I think that specific matchup the Celtics kind of own. But I do agree that it's kind of the Celtics and the Bucks at the top here, and the Devil Magic worshippers, the Heat. So you have mentioned.
Well, can I just a couple points on that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
One, I'd say Horford, huge X factor for this season, right? Because he has been the key to at least controlling Giannis defensively, or at least containing him a little bit, right? So you're going to need him for big minutes because he's so smart. He can avoid the foul trouble. He can defend Giannis without immediately just getting bowled over and getting sent to the bench because he's got too many fouls. So Horford's ability to hold up and just be ready for those big moments is massive. He was so good in that 22 playoff series, and I know he didn't get all the attention. You guys probably showered him with love, and
we did.
But
we did.
It's easier to give Tatum when he's just going nuts and hitting whatever it was, 20 points in quarters and all that, for him to get the headline. But Horford Horford equally important in that series. And then the other thing I think is we do know Middleton will be better than who the Bucks had to roll out there on the perimeter in that 22 series, because they had nobody whatsoever to kind of use against Tatum, and that's part of the reason why he was going so nuts. They just didn't even have like competent options. Last point would be, I think some of Giannis's jockeying in these interviews this summer is trying to put pressure to add another piece before the playoffs, right? Not to like, hey, we brought the gang back, here we are. It's it's Drew and it's Chris and it's Giannis and it's Portis and it's Lopez. We've got the same guys who won the title in 21. We're ready to rock. I think he looks at their roster and came to the same conclusion I think all of us did, which is they didn't get better this summer. If they're going to compete with Boston and they're going to go deep again in the postseason, they need something else to help. I don't know what that piece looks like, but I think that's part of the reason why he's applying so much pressure. I don't think it's just this idea of, I'm ready for my next chapter and I'm laying the groundwork. I think it's like, I want us to invest whatever we've got to get another guy so Grayson Allen doesn't have to play 32 minutes in a playoff game, because that's not going to work, right? So I think that's sort of where he's coming from. And so maybe the Bucks look a little bit different in February than they do right now.
I think that's possible. I would just, what's the impact guy they're going to add? They gave up 5 second-round picks for Jay Crowder. They are so low. They are so low on assets. It's crazy when I was looking at it. So moving on to our guy, Jayson Tatum. You've kind of alluded that he'd kind of become that guy on your top 100 list, listening to the GOAT yesterday. I was ready to kind of have my arguments about why Tatum was too low, but you and Ben were kind of, you and Andrew Sharp were kind of locked in on Tatum at the 4 spot. And just for listeners, Jayson Tatum's kind of nickname on the GOAT podcast is 12-time Tatum, kind of created during his rookie season when the Boston media machine
before his rookie season. It was Summer League.
The Summer League. He was good.
League.
He was good in that Summer League. 12-time Tatum Enterprises, kind of in jest because, the Boston media is treating this guy like he's going to be a 12-time All-Star, which we were.
Yes.
But it looks like he might end up...
Definitely.
We definitely were, but it does look like he's going to end up being a 12-time All-NBA player, not just a 12-time All-Star. So we've gone up and through, and 12-time Enterprises are doing very well. But are you prepared for a 12-time Tatum Enterprises and a Giannis Inc. merger? Because I'm not. I know you mentioned that it's not necessarily for this season and for the overarching. I'm going to get traded. I'm not sure. Giannis has spent pretty much the offseason saying that this roster is not good enough to win a title. Once the Celtics dispatch of them again in the upcoming playoffs, and Giannis is looking around for a trade, he's going to be wanting to go to a contender. Tick. The Celtics will be one of those guys. Do you know who Giannis drafted first overall in the All-Star game for Team Giannis?
Was it Tatum last year?
It was Jayson Tatum.
And that's why they lost, right? They lose every year. Bron beats him every single year.
No, this is the year that the Team
Did
Giannis
they actually
won.
get it? They finally broke the streak. You're right.
Don't forget, Giannis picked perfect.
MVP.
He drafted the MVP.
Oh, I forgot. Look. I was at that All-Star game. Second of all, that was the worst All-Star game I've ever seen in person. I've never seen
I disagree.
I've never seen fans leave an All-Star game during the fourth quarter out of boredom, and they were doing that in Utah. So congratulations, your big record-setting performance for Jayson Tatum. Oh, it's just a brutal watch.
I could not disagree more. One of the best All-Star games I've ever seen.
We were on the edges of our seats.
Yeah.
We couldn't get up. Leave the room.
Giannis, great draft pick. Picks the MVP. Planting some seeds a la LeBron James, looking ahead. The Bucks don't own any of their draft picks, so they will not be tanking. Looking to tank in a Giannis trade. So who's the best player they can get in a trade? A blue chip player plus a young player plus all their picks. The Celtics have all their own draft picks plus extra draft picks plus Jalen Brown. You go through the top 20, 25 players. There's not a lot of guys on that list that fit in surefire contender that's worth leaving Milwaukee for, and the team being willing to move on from that player in the sense that it doesn't make sense to lose that player and that team to still be a contender. You put Jayson Tatum and Giannis together, I don't care who they send out. That's a favorite for the next half decade.
Do we need to preface this with saying don't aggregate this answer as well? We're just having a yarn here.
This is just for fun, but I'm prepared for this Giannis Tatum merger. And this one, look, Brad Stevens already traded Marcus Smart. I'm not worried.
Go ahead and aggregate this. You're a green beer drinker and you're a green tree smoker, man. You're so divorced from what is going to happen. Reality has left your body, okay, at the start of that answer. I love the logic, okay? I was nodding along. You're making a very good case. As a takesman, it's an A-plus takesman maneuver.
Great.
But he's not going to get traded to the Celtics, dude.
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. Why
Do
not?
you want... Well, let me ask you, would you want the Celtics to be Giannis' team? Because obviously, if he got traded there, it wouldn't be Tatum's team anymore, right?
Couldn't care less. Give me Giannis and Tatum on the same team. Giannis Inc. and Tatum Enterprises would be like Apple and Amazon merging. It would be an unstoppable force, and I'm totally okay with it. I'm sorry, Jalen. I know you've reposted our Instagram video this last season, but I love you.
Yeah, big fan of the pod, Jalen Brown. All right, 2 quick ones to end up on here, Ben, because we don't want to keep you here all night. So speaking of Jalen Brown, I need to live my life feeling like he has not reached his ceiling. And I feel like, if Kawhi Leonard can learn how to shoot, then Jalen Brown can learn how to go left. And we've talked about Jayson Tatum a lot. We've talked about Kristaps Porzingis, even Brad Stevens, a part of being the recipe for this team's success. And yet we've got this all-NBA player in Jalen Brown sitting there who we've barely mentioned all podcast. Do you feel that Jalen Brown has reached his ceiling? And if not, how far can he go, and how integral is that to the Celtics' success this year and beyond?
I might be the wrong person to ask this one. I saw Jalen Brown play when he was in high school, and he was already like top 2, top 3 recruit in the country. So he can't. Look, this wasn't Ben Simmons high school hype. It wasn't, Andrew Wiggins high school hype, but he was a known commodity. He was supposed to be the guy in the gym. I'll be honest, I watched him. I just didn't see it. I don't know. Like, he's got a prototypical body. I get it. But he wasn't like he was like out muscling and, blowing by everybody and just destroying the high school competition, which is what you typically see. I mean, even guys like Tyreek Evans, are just, when they're in high school, just destroying people. Or remember Shabazz Muhammad, when he was like 5 years older than everybody else, but he was killing people in high school. And so I was kind of expecting that from Jalen Brown. It really wasn't that. And again, when he started his Celtics career, I was surprised they took him where they did. And, I didn't love what I saw. I kind of got it, kind of didn't. But he's never been one of those guys who just like absolutely grabs me. The thing that I'll give him credit for is he continued to really, work on his game, improve over the course of his rookie contract, the end of that second contract, to the point where he obviously made his second contract look like a bad idea. Like he should have wanted a lot more money. It was a great value play by Boston. It was smart that they gave him that deal when they did. I don't think I'm ever going to say that about this current one, though. And I think the challenge for Jalen, and this happens, is that people start to judge you based on your contract rather than based on your play, right? Yeah. And I just don't see any way he's going to be able to live up to that number, and I'm not going to hold that against him, right? He's been proving me wrong now for 6 or 7 straight years, so it's possible he proves me wrong again, but there's just so many expectations that come with that. The only way he's going to be able to play his way from out under that shadow is if they win a title. If he wins a title, then all bets are off. People are going to be fine paying him $200 million. They'll sign up to pay him another $250 million, right? But that's a really tough spot to be in. That's huge expectations, huge pressure, and he's not always in control. It's Tatum's team. There's no question about it. The way the fan base responds to Tatum in the building, the way he gets treated by marketers, the fact that he's got his own shoe. It's just a really hard spot to be in when you're that number 2 guy making massive, massive money. And probably going into next season, like if it comes down to one shot and Marcus isn't there to miss it, it's going to be in Tatum's hands, right? And now your reputation is relying upon someone else's success. It takes a special kind of guy to be okay with that. And I actually give Jalen a lot of credit for wanting to sign back up and to want to do it, because not everybody wants to do that. A lot of these guys want their own team, and I think it's cool because they are a part of something special in Boston. They've been winning more consistently than almost anybody over these last 5 or 6 years together. And just because they haven't won at all doesn't mean it's been, a failure. And I appreciate. I mean, it's easy to sign a contract that's that big.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to think twice over it, really. But the recommitment says a lot about him and says something about the Celtics too.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much more Jalen has to go to, if there's another ceiling. I would say he has really indicated this all offseason that he wants to really set the tone defensively. And I do think that that's something that's in his control. And
Did he slip? Did he slip last year a little bit?
I did always think his defensive reputation has been way out of whack with what actually has been on the court. He, for some reason, has had a better defensive reputation than Tatum for their whole careers until recently, when it's could not be further than the truth. Jalen's a good on-ball defender when he's locked in. For example, the Harden matchup, once Harden wins game 1 in Boston, and then Jalen takes that matchup. I kind of call him an ADHD defender. When he's locked in on ball, he can really, really lock in. But then off ball, he's kind of a bit of a mess. Defensive rebounding wise, he's fine, but not on the same level as Tatum. I do think on ball defense is where he can really excel, hands in passing lanes. And a place that he's never really lived up to his defensive reputation, I don't think. But I do think that that's a way to endear yourself to the fans and actually have a real impact overall on a team's defense. Even though they were second overall, it was nowhere near where the defense was the year previous. That would be one spot I think that's actually in his control. I don't know if the handle and the stuff like that's ever going to he's never going to be a lead playmaker, the one-to-one assist to turnover stuff. He had one stretch post All-Star break where it looked like maybe I made a great video about is this the thing where he goes to more of a Kevin Durant assist to turnover ratio, which is still not amazing, but has a really big overall impact. if he's playing the right role, that kind of goes away. I think so. It's more of a mentality thing. It's just like accepting like who he is as a player and what things he can kind of focus his energy on to have get as close to that $300 million impact, because there's like 4 or 5 guys that can live up to that level of impact. I don't think Jalen's in that conversation. The good thing is that I think people are overreacting to the size of the contract. Anthony Davis has already signed a higher annual number, and if you want to tell me you want Jaylen Brown at 32 making 60 mil or Anthony Davis at 36 making 60 mil, you can't tell me that Jaylen Brown's going to be the better player at that point. But yeah, Ben,
more big contracts are coming, right? I mean,
I don't.
He's just kind of in the beginning cycle of the wave, and people will get over the sticker shock. When I do look at this trio, though, or even you could throw Derek White in, I don't know, but I look at Tatum, I look at Brown, I look at Porzingis. I think the big deficiency is you need somebody who could step forward in big moments, not just as the clutch scorer, but as the clutch playmaker for his teammates, the clutch distributor. I'm with what you said, Jake. I don't think Jalen's going to, whether it's the left hand talk and all that, a little bit overblown, but I just don't think he has the vision. I don't think he's ever really been that guy. Porzingis, look, it's going up. Like, when he gets the ball, it's going up one way or the other.
That's fine.
It comes back to Tatum for me. I think that of those 3 guys, who could take the step forward as a playmaker, Tatum's made some strides there. I would love to see him continue to make strides in that particular role, because I think this group dynamic, especially with the closing lineups they're going to play, is going to be a little deficient in that area. And I think he's the guy who can kind of maybe fill in some of those gaps. He's going to need to be, I think, if they're going to win a title.
I would much rather see Porzingis fire up a bad shot than have us turn the ball over in crunch time. I don't know why we can't figure out. You know what's better than a bad shot? I mean, what's better than a turnover is a bad shot, because like some of these turnovers are just when they're the Celtics up 10 with 5 minutes to go. Like, it's the worst team in NBA history, and I think Porzingis give me Porzingis in the post over whatever the Celtics have been doing in crunch time a lot of the time, and I think that's an improvement. Last question for you, Ben, and we'll let you get out of here. I think Basketball Junkie doesn't even get close to describing the level of passion for the game, both internationally, nationally, that you seem to have from my perspective, like whether it's Summer League, Bubble, Tokyo, like you're everywhere. And, as basketball sickos ourselves, I thought it would be cool to ask you what is like either the best event, best moment, something that you still haven't done that you would like to go to from a basketball perspective that you could share with us.
Man, it's a good one. I mean, bucket list, you look back, it's crazy. I mean, I just think about how many big games I've been able to see. Game 4 of the 2022 finals, Game 6 of the 2022 finals. I could go on and on. Game
I had
7,
in my notes to say you can't say that. In my notes it says,
sorry.
and you can't say that, and I forgot to say it, and that's what happens, Jake. Come on.
I've just roasted you. Look, it's tricky, man. So I got to do the Olympics. That was my first Olympics in Tokyo.
Yeah.
I would love to do an Olympics
Sure.
where, let's say it's USA versus a rival, whether you want to say it's Canada, Spain, France, Australia, whoever would be in that gold medal game with like a huge, crazy crowd. I would love to see that, because I haven't quite seen that international intensity. I mean, I would love to see them play Serbia in the final and watch the Serbian fans, right? That's the kind of thing on my basketball bucket list. I mean, I think in terms, I've never done a Final Four for NCAA. I've done a bunch of regionals, so I would like to see a Final Four sometime. Beyond that, I think the coolest thing I've ever got to do was the bubble. We talked about that a lot previously. I mean, that just felt like a private showing where it's like, here's like the most of the best, like 250 basketball players in the world, and you're one of 30 people who gets to watch them and hear them talk trash and call out defensive coverages and watch Bam Adebayo block Jayson Tatum at the rim. And,
good.
I just roasted you again.
You're very good at it.
I knew this was going to happen.
He was asking for it. So I mean, that's going to be hard to top. Like being in a situation where you could basically go to see every single playoff game in a year. I mean, even Jimmy Goldstein with a private jet can't do that, right? So in terms of bucket list, that's pretty difficult to top. But other than that, I've never covered the FIBA World Cup in person. That we just got done with that tournament. It looked like a great time. I had some real FOMO because the crowds were so awesome down there. So I'd say that one's on my list too.
Yeah, I got to jump in with the FIBA World Cup. Well, so I live in Sydney, Australia, but I flew down to Melbourne when Team USA flew out here to play Australia 3 times, twice in Melbourne, once in Sydney. I went to all 3 games. Game 2 down there in Melbourne, Australia beat Team USA.
You got them. You got them.
And whatever, it's like the preseason equivalent of FIBA, so it's not a big deal, I guess, to the USA folks. But to us,
was a big deal.
Absolutely. Nationally, and the trajectory that Australian basketball is on, to get that win was a huge deal. It was a stadium game. There was probably 50,000 people there in the arena, and the roar of the crowd, I've got it on my Instagram if anyone cares, was incredible. It was such a good scene. And then the flow out of everyone into the pubs around Melbourne after the game was awesome. I also went to Game 3 of the NBA Finals and Game 4, unfortunately, last year. And Game 3, when we went up 2-1, and it felt like for a moment we were sniffing a title. I'll never forget that feeling. I wish I could stay there in that little crevice of positivity. Unfortunately, we have to move on. But 2 notable basketball memories for me. What do you got, Jake?
Yeah, I think my coolest one I was at the Sydney Olympics in 2000, the game where Vince Carter jumped over Frederick Weiss. So like that's like my coolest claim to fame. The problem is I was 7 years old, and so like I remember like being there, and I remember. And like my brain has like concocted it in, because I've watched so many highlights and like I know that I was at the game, but like I can't truly be like I saw it, but like I love the fact that I was there for maybe the greatest dunk of all time. Being at Game 2 of the Nets Celtics series, I flew over for a Game 2 and Game 3. Yeah. The Peyton Pritchard comeback game, Portland legend. I know Ben Golliver being from Portland, love to see that. That was a great series. And then to watch the Celtics kind of wrap up the 3-0 in Brooklyn, which was cool. I was in the very last row. And so, look, it was the change in atmosphere from the Garden to Barclays Center was stark, to say the least. But yeah,
like more Celtics fans in Barclays than they had Nets fans. I mean, I was at those games too, flying across the country, expecting a big show, and the Nets were gonna like put their foot down and give us a great series, and they flopped like fish, didn't they? Just rolled right over.
Yeah, they really. Yeah, it was beautiful. Beautiful to see. But yeah, as far as bucket list goes, like ironically, Ben Golliver and I, our first interaction was bronze medal match. We got a bunch of Aussies in the chat. Of course, Tim Preston, Aussie Phil, the crew. Bronze medal match, Slovenia, Boomers. Patty Mills goes off for 40, and I was like euphoric, and I messaged Ben because I knew you were at the game, and I was like, "What a legend!" And you responded with like absolute legend of the game, etc. And I love that like you're not just NBA purist, like broadly with basketball. So my bucket list is 2032 Olympics in Australia, in Brisbane. Josh Giddey's going to be like smack bang in his prime. Like this next crop of like NBA 6'8" dudes like that we've got. I think that's going to be like our best team since the team that we had at that last Olympics. This team going into the next Olympics, I think it's kind of a transition period. But that 2032, fair way off still. But but I got a long way to get hyped up for that. I think that team is going to be really, really good and really, really exciting. And Australian basketball in general, like, is just growing so much every year. Like we've got more and more prospects coming into the draft. We've got more and more stars in the NBL. Alex Sarr, the next number 1 overall pick, potentially playing in the NBL this year. But like that one, Boomers 2032. Hopefully you'll be there, Ben. I know you haven't been to Australia. Maybe that's
not yet. Very high on my bucket list for travel destinations. I mean, the thing with Patty Mills too, and I can't remember if I told you this or not, is obviously he was drafted to Portland right when I was getting my start as a writer in Portland. So I know like baby Patty. You guys probably can go back to when he was like a high school legend, was he from like Northern Australia, right? If I remember, is that right?
Yeah, I believe
so. So you guys could probably go further back than I can, but to see that pay off, it's like he comes in as a second-round pick, tiny little guy. He was a fan favorite because he could just do the stop and pop three-pointers, and he had all these different little hand motions and stuff. The crowd loved him in Portland, and to watch that pay off, like 12, 13 years later, with the medal and with the post-game interactions with KD, where like they're kind of him and all that stuff. That was just like, I mean, there wasn't very many iconic moments from that Tokyo Olympics because it was in a gigantic stadium, like you're saying, the Australia one, it's just huge and it's completely empty, right? There's like 300 people watching the game. So it was super weird, even weirder than the bubble for actually a gameplay experience. So that was maybe the highlight of the whole deal was like him and KD like having a good time. And I think was it Udoka or Vanderpool or somebody was popping into? So,
it was Udoka because KD was like, we got trouble for them Boston Celtics, and in fact there was not trouble for those Boston Celtics from Brooklyn Nets. Well, there was trouble to come, especially when you include Ime Udoka, but. Man, that moment, a lot of sliding doors in that little interaction. Well, that's to be front row for those interactions. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're incredibly jealous of. But love that you're always there, and I can always count on you for some incredible. Like if you're not following Ben Golliver like on Instagram, like and Twitter and stuff, like he puts up some of like the greatest like videos, locker room, like champagnes, like celebrations, like really good stuff that ends up getting ripped off and retweeted and all over.
It's for the world. Don't look at it like that. Content is meant to be free. That's how I look at it. Basketball. Anyone who's kind of interacting with basketball and getting excited about basketball from any little slice that I get to do makes me happy. Hearing you guys talk about seeing certain games. I mean, that 2000. That's wild, dude. That's pretty crazy. So those are the kind of stories I love. And imagine if the guy who shot the Vince Carter video like refused to put it on the internet, or like started like DMCA claiming everything and saying, no, it's my content, you got to take it down. It's like, well, you're killing the sport here, man. Like you're single-handedly preventing people from being fans. So I take a very liberal approach on that stuff.
I love it. Well, we'll let you get out of here. I mean, we're so appreciative of you giving us the time. Firstly, what do you have to plug? Obviously, we've talked about the Greatest of All Talk podcast, which is incredible. But yeah, go ahead, plug away.
Well, that's the best place, to listen along. I mean, if you like shows like you guys are doing right now, greatestofalltalk.com is the place to sign up for a podcast. We do 2 shows a week. I travel around the NBA a lot during the season, but especially during the playoffs. So you get a lot of firsthand accounts from playoff games. And then, of course, all my writings at WashingtonPost.com/sports. And the Instagram is at Ben.Golliver. So I think that'll probably do it. That'll cover you.
Yeah, amazing. I love it so much. Yeah, and Ben Vallis, any closing remarks?
No, not at all. Just a big thanks to Ben Golliver for joining us. I know we've kept you a really long time, so I really appreciate your time and all your insights. And I hope that by the end of the year we can get you back on and talk about, Porzingis playing 82 games, Celtics championship, and we can go from there.
You could definitely book me for the Porzingis' 82nd regular season game. All right, write it in Sharpie, as Seth Davis said.
Yeah.
Go ahead and write that one in Sharpie. I'll be there.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
Awesome. And then programming note, I think Ben and Spoonie will be back again later in the week. I'm now a maybe for the next 3 weeks to everybody in the audience. I'm bringing the microphone with me, but I've got bachelor party, wedding, honeymoon, next 3 weeks. All ending though, don't worry, 20th of October, before the season starts. We'll be back streaming live. Everything's coming. I'm sure I'll be coming on live after the Celtics' first preseason game where Porzingis makes it through the game with no foot issues whatsoever. But yeah, until next time, go Celtics.
I love